It was a dark, moonless night on Route 666, a desolate highway cutting through the vast deserts of New Mexico. Mike, a seasoned trucker with 20 years on the road, had heard the stories about this route but dismissed them as urban legends. His cargo was urgent, and he couldn't afford to take a detour. Around midnight, Mike spotted a figure on the side of the road, illuminated briefly by his headlights. A woman in a white dress, barefoot, with her thumb out. Against his better judgment, he pulled over. As a trucker, he'd often helped stranded motorists, and this looked like someone in desperate need. The woman climbed into the cab, her expression vacant and eyes staring straight ahead. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the engine. "Where you headed?" Mike asked, trying to break the eerie silence. "Just a bit further," she replied, her eyes not meeting his. As they drove, Mike tried to make small talk, but she remained silent, her gaze fixed on the road ahead. After several miles, she pointed to an old, abandoned gas station. "Here," she said. Mike pulled over, and as soon as the truck stopped, the woman vanished. Not out the door or into the darkness, she simply vanished into thin air. Mike's heart pounded as he searched the cab, but there was no sign of her. Terrified, Mike decided to leave immediately. But as he started the engine, his radio crackled to life. "She's with you now," a voice whispered. In the days that followed, Mike couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. At night, he'd catch glimpses of the woman in his mirrors, always just behind him, her eyes filled with a sorrowful emptiness. It wasn't until he visited a local diner and shared his story that he learned the truth. The woman was a hitchhiker who had been murdered on Route 666 decades ago. Truckers who picked her up often reported seeing her, always vanishing near the old gas stations. Mike knew he had to finish his delivery, but the haunting presence of the midnight hitchhiker would stay with him forever. Tom had been driving his rig for over 15 years, crisscrossing the country from coast to coast. One of his favorite routes was through the Rocky Mountains, despite the treacherous roads and unpredictable weather. On one such trip, a heavy snowstorm forced him to pull into a rest stop for the night. The rest stop was nearly deserted, with only a few other trucks parked in the lot. Tom climbed into his sleeper cab and drifted off to sleep, hoping the storm would pass by morning. He awoke to the sound of engines and CB radios crackling. Looking out his window, he saw a convoy of old trucks, their headlights barely piercing the swirling snow. The lead truck, an ancient Peterbilt, looked like it had seen better days. Curious, Tom tuned his CB to their frequency. "Convoy to base, over," a voice crackled. It sounded old, almost otherworldly. "Base to convoy, proceed with caution." "Report any sightings, over," another voice replied. Tom's curiosity got the better of him, and he decided to follow them. He started his truck and fell in line at the end of the convoy. The trucks moved slowly through the blizzard, their taillights barely visible. After a few miles, the lead truck turned off the main road onto a narrow, unmarked trail. Tom hesitated but decided to continue. The trail wound through dense forests, and the further they went, the more uneasy he felt. The CB crackled again. "Convoy to base, sighting reported at mile marker 13, over." "Base to convoy, acknowledged." "Proceed with caution, over." At mile marker 13, the convoy stopped. Tom watched as the drivers of the other trucks got out, their movements slow and deliberate. He noticed something strange, their clothes were outdated, as if they were from a different era. The lead driver approached Tom's window. "You're not supposed to be here," the man said, his voice hollow and echoing. Tom felt a chill run down his spine. "I was just following the convoy," he stammered. The man nodded slowly. "This convoy travels the ghost roads, seeking the lost. You must turn back, or you will become one of us." Terrified, Tom threw his truck into reverse and backed out of the trail as quickly as he could. He didn't stop until he was back on the main road. The storm had cleared, but the memory of the phantom convoy haunted him. Later, he learned that the trail led to an old mining town where a convoy of trucks had disappeared during a blizzard in the 1930s. Their drivers were never found. Tom realized he had narrowly escaped joining their eternal search on the ghost roads. Jake was a long-haul trucker, accustomed to the long, lonely stretches of highway that seemed to stretch into infinity. One night, on a remote stretch of highway in Nevada, he found himself desperately in need of a break. He spotted a sign for a rest stop and pulled in, relieved to find a place to stretch his legs. The rest stop was eerily quiet, with only a few other vehicles parked haphazardly. As Jake stepped out of his truck, he noticed the air felt different, heavier, almost oppressive. The rest stop looked old, as if it had been frozen in time from the 1950s. The vending machines were ancient, and the lights flickered weakly. Jake walked to the restroom, the fluorescent lights inside buzzing and flickering. As he washed his hands, he heard a faint whisper. He looked around, but there was no one else there. Shaking it off, he headed back to his truck. As he walked across the parking lot, he noticed a man sitting on a bench near the edge of the rest stop. The man was staring into the darkness, his face gaunt and eyes hollow. Jake approached him, feeling an inexplicable pull. "Hey, you all right?" Jake asked. The man turned slowly, his eyes empty. "We're all waiting," he said cryptically. "Waiting for what?" Jake asked, but the man simply turned back to the darkness. Unnerved, Jake hurried back to his truck. As he started the engine, his radio crackled to life. Static filled the cab, followed by voices speaking in hushed tones. He recognized none of the stations, but they all seemed to be talking about a place called the end of the world. Determined to leave, Jake drove back onto the highway. But no matter how far he drove, the rest stop sign kept reappearing, urging him to turn back. Hours passed, and Jake realized he was trapped in a loop, the rest stop sign haunting him at every mile. Desperate, he pulled over and grabbed his map. To his horror, the rest stop wasn't marked. It was as if it never existed. Just then, a figure appeared in his rearview mirror, the same man from the bench, now standing right behind his truck. Jake floored the gas, speeding down the highway. The radio continued its eerie broadcast, the voices growing more frantic. "You can't leave," they whispered. "The end of the world is here." Finally, as dawn broke, Jake saw a familiar landmark, a diner he had passed hours earlier. He pulled in, shaken but relieved to see other people. Inside, he shared his story with the waitress, who listened with a knowing look. "You're not the first," she said. "That rest stop appears to those who are lost, in more ways than one. Some never find their way out." Jake finished his meal and left, vowing never to take that route again. But the memory of the rest stop at the end of the world lingered, a haunting reminder of the thin line between reality and the unknown. For more horror stories, please subscribe to this channel.